The phone screen glowed in the dim light of my apartment, illuminating the disaster in high definition. My thumb hovered over the glass, trembling slightly, but the damage was already done. The message bubble sat there, blue and innocent, containing a sentence that would likely dismantle my entire career. I've been thinking about your hands all day. It was intended for the woman I'd met at the gallery opening, an impulsive, late-night confession of interest. It was not intended for the contact listed above it, Vivian Sterling, CEO. The blood drained from my face so fast it left me dizzy. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the frantic thudding of my heart against my ribs. I stared at the name, praying for a glitch, a mistake, anything. Then the 3 dots appeared. The typing indicator bubbled up, dancing, taunting. She was awake. She was reading it. She was replying. I held my breath, my lungs burning, waiting for the termination text. Then the dots vanished. The screen went dark. No reply, just the terrifying, absolute void of knowing she had seen it, and she had chosen silence. The morning sun felt intrusive, too bright and too cheerful for a woman walking to her execution. I hadn't slept, not really. I'd spent 6 hours staring at the ceiling, dissecting the text, replaying the moment my thumb slipped, imagining the various ways Vivian Sterling could destroy me. By the time I swiped my badge at the lobby turnstile, the caffeine in my system was doing nothing but vibrating in my fingertips. The lobby of Sterling and Hart was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to make you feel small, and today it was working exceptionally well. The air conditioning hit me the moment I stepped off the elevator onto the analyst floor, a wall of artificial cold that smelled of ozone and expensive cleaning products. Usually, I loved this. I loved the sharp click of heels on polished concrete, the low hum of productivity, the way the light caught the dust motes dancing in the atrium. I was a senior analyst. I was competent. I was the person people came to when they needed complex data synthesized into strategy. I didn't make mistakes. I certainly didn't send thirst texts to the woman who signed my paychecks. But Vivian Sterling wasn't just a boss. In the hushed corridors of the 42nd floor and in the terrified whispers of the break room, she was known as the machine. It fit her. She was precise, architectural in her cruelty, and utterly devoid of unnecessary friction. I had watched her dismantle a competitor's acquisition strategy in a 20-minute meeting without ever raising her voice. She wore suits that looked like they were cut from steel and silk, and she moved through the office with a terrifying, fluid grace. For 2 years, I had admired her from a safe, respectful distance, fascinated by her efficiency, by the way she commanded a room simply by existing in it. Now, that distance was gone. I had breached the perimeter with a sentence about her hands. I reached my desk, my sanctuary of dual monitors and ergonomic order. I expected an email, a calendar invite from HR, a security guard waiting with a cardboard box. Instead, there was a single envelope sitting squarely in the center of my keyboard. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock, not standard office supply issue. My name was written on the front in black ink. The handwriting was jagged and elegant, sharp vertical lines that looked like they could cut skin. I sat down, my knees suddenly watery. The office buzzed around me, phones ringing, the murmur of the morning stand-up meeting in the conference room. But the sounds felt miles away, muffled by the roaring in my ears. I slid a finger under the flap of the envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside, there was a single card, the same heavy stock. My office, 9 a.m. Don't be late. No signature. None was needed. I checked the time. 8:52 a.m. I had 8 minutes of freedom left. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer, trying to command my hands to stop shaking. The walk to the elevator felt like wading through water. I pressed the button for the executive floor, the one that required a special key card, and watched the doors slide shut, sealing me in. The ascent was smooth, silent, and nauseating. The numbers on the display climbed higher, counting down the seconds of my career. I tried to prepare a defense. A hacked phone, a prank by a roommate, a drunken mistake. But Vivian Sterling didn't tolerate excuses. She valued precision. She valued truth. And the truth was, even if the text was a mistake, the sentiment wasn't entirely a lie. I had noticed her hands. The precision of her grip, the capability in her fingers. That was the real crime. Not the text, but the exposure. The vulnerability of being seen. The elevator chimed soft and polite. The doors opened. The executive reception area was empty, the receptionist likely on a coffee run. The double glass doors to her office stood at the end of the hall, closed, imposing. I took a breath, the air thin and rarefied up here, and walked toward the edge of the cliff. I knocked once on the heavy oak door. There was no answer, just the hum of the building's ventilation system. But the summons had been specific. I pushed the handle down. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a space that felt less like an office and more like a high-altitude observation deck. The room was vast, dominated by floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the city's gray, rain-slicked grid. The furniture was sparse, a sleek, glass-topped desk, 2 uncomfortable-looking leather chairs, and a single bookshelf lined with legal texts that looked like they had never been opened. The air here was different than in the hallway. It was cooler, thinner, and carried a faint, distinct scent, expensive amber and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. It smelled like a storm that had just broken, or perhaps one that was about to start. Vivian Sterling was standing by the window, her back to me. She was wearing a charcoal suit, the jacket tailored to within an inch of its life, her posture rigid. She didn't turn when the latch clicked shut behind me. She just stood there, watching the traffic crawl 40 stories below, holding the silence like a weapon she knew exactly how to use. I walked to the center of the room and stopped. My heels sank into the plush carpet, muffling the sound of my approach. I waited. The silence stretched, becoming a physical weight in the room, pressing against my chest until breathing felt like a conscious, labored effort. "I have a rule about apologies," she said finally. Her voice was low, smooth, and terrified me down to my marrow. She still didn't turn around. "I find them tedious. They are usually an attempt to absolve the sinner rather than comfort the aggrieved. So before you start explaining, don't." She turned then. The movement was slow, deliberate. Her face was unreadable, a mask of porcelain and intelligence. Her eyes, dark and sharp, locked onto mine with a force that made me want to step back. She wasn't holding her phone. She didn't need to. "I've been thinking about your hands all day," she recited. She spoke the words with a terrifying clinical detachment, stripping them of any heat or romance, leaving only the raw, embarrassing fact of them. It sounded like she was reading a line item from a quarterly audit. I opened my mouth, then closed it. My throat felt like it was filled with sand. "Vivian, Ms. Sterling," she corrected, her voice dropping a degree. She walked toward her desk, her movements fluid. She didn't sit. She leaned against the edge of the glass, crossing her arms. That message was sent at 11:43 p.m., a time when most of my employees are sleeping, or perhaps drinking away the stress of working for me. You, however, were thinking about my hands. "It was a mistake," I managed, the words sounding pathetic even to my own ears. "It wasn't intended for you." "I assumed as much. I doubt you have the courage to say that to my face intentionally." She tilted her head, studying me like a specimen under a slide. "But the intent of the recipient is irrelevant. The content is what interests me. You're an analyst, aren't you? Data synthesis?" "Yes. And you've been watching me." Everyone watches you," I deflected, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "Not like that. Most people watch my face to see if I'm angry, or they watch the screen to see the numbers. You were watching my hands." She held them up briefly, turning them over. Long fingers, manicured nails, palms that held the power to dissolve companies. Then she dropped them. "That implies a level of observation I wasn't aware you possessed. It implies you were looking at the mechanics of how I work, not just the result." The air in the room shifted. The dread in my stomach twisted into something else. Confusion. And a sharp, dangerous spike of adrenaline. "The Kensington merger is stalling," she said abruptly, the pivot so fast it gave me whiplash. "The due diligence is a mess. The opposing counsel is burying us in paper, hiding the liabilities in the footnotes. I need someone who reads the footnotes. I need someone who notices the small things, the gestures, the mechanics. She picked up a file from the desk and held it out. "You're not fired. You're reassigned. You will report directly to this office until the deal closes. You will review every document, every email, every contract. You will be my eyes on the ground." She paused, her gaze dropping to my hands, which were clenched at my sides, then back to my face. "Since you seem so interested in hands, I expect you to get yours dirty. This deal requires obsessive attention to detail. Do not make me regret trusting your focus." I took the file. My hand brushed hers, just for a microsecond, and the contact sent a shock through me that was almost painful. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She just watched me, a small, unreadable smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "Get to work," she said, "and change your contact names. Next time, you might not be so lucky." My entire professional existence shrank to the dimensions of a 6-foot, sleek desk situated directly outside the glass walls of her office. It was a strategic position, designed with architectural cruelty. I was the gatekeeper, but I was also the prisoner. Every time I looked up from the endless streams of due diligence data, I saw her. She was a silhouette against the gray sky, a constant, unmoving force behind the glass. The panopticon effect was absolute. I couldn't check my phone, couldn't slouch, couldn't breathe without feeling the weight of her attention on the back of my neck. The work was brutal. The Kensington merger wasn't just a deal. It was a labyrinth of shell companies and buried debt that required forensic levels of patience. I spent 12 hours a day hunting for ghosts in the spreadsheets, fueled by lukewarm espresso and fear. But the exhaustion wasn't what kept my heart rate elevated. It was the sensation of being observed. I could feel her gaze like a physical touch, a laser pointer tracing the curvature of my spine. 2 weeks in, the pattern shifted. The office had emptied out completely. It was nearly midnight. The cleaning crews had already ghosted through, leaving the sharp scent of lemon polish in their wake. The city below was a grid of amber and white, indifferent to our insomnia. I was drowning in a frantic search for a liability clause in a subsidiary contract from 2018. My eyes burned. The blue light of the monitor felt like it was etching itself into my retinas. Then, the glass door slid open. I didn't turn around immediately. I finished typing the sentence, a small act of rebellion to prove I wasn't just waiting for her signal. "You missed a citation on page 42. Her voice was right at my shoulder. Close. Too close. I spun the chair around. Vivian was standing there, holding a tablet. She had discarded the blazer hours ago. She was in a silk blouse now, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, revealing forearms that were deceptively delicate. "I haven't got to page 42 yet," I said, my voice sounding rough in the quiet room. "Then you're behind schedule." She didn't move back. She leaned over my shoulder to place the tablet on my desk. The proximity was instantaneous and overwhelming. The scent of her, that amber and ozone mix, now warmed by 12 hours of wearing it, flooded my senses. It wasn't just a smell, it was an atmosphere. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a stark contrast to the aggressively chilled air of the office. She pointed to a paragraph on the screen. "Here," she said, "this clause. It contradicts the indemnity agreement." I reached for the tablet to zoom in. My hand moved, her hand didn't. My fingers brushed against hers, the side of my index finger sliding against her knuckle. The contact was electric. It wasn't a spark, it was a circuit closing. The air in the room seemed to vanish, sucked out by the sudden spike in tension. A normal boss would have pulled away. A normal person would have murmured an apology. Vivian Sterling did neither. She kept her hand exactly where it was, her skin cool against the heat of mine. I looked up. She was looking down at me, her face inches away. Her eyes were dark, dilated in the low light. She wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She was looking at my mouth, then my eyes, with that same terrifying analytical precision. "Do you see it?" she asked softly. "The clause?" I stammered, my brain misfiring. The contradiction. She wasn't talking about the contract. We both knew it. She was talking about the space between us. The professional distance that was currently being obliterated by the fact that she was effectively trapping me between her body and the desk. "Yes," I breathed. "I see it." "Good." She tapped the screen once, her finger pressing down next to mine, holding the contact for a second longer than necessary. Then she straightened up. The loss of her warmth was a physical blow. Fix it. I want the revised draft on my desk by morning. She turned and walked back into her glass cage. She didn't look back. She sat down, picked up her pen, and went back to work as if she hadn't just set my nervous system on fire. I stared at the tablet, my hand still tingling. This wasn't a punishment. It wasn't just work. She was testing me. She was seeing how close she could get to the flame without burning down the building. She was playing a game of chicken, and she had just floored the accelerator. The invitation wasn't a request. It was a logistics memo. Mandatory attendance. Black tie. I stood in the ballroom of the Pierre, clutching a champagne flute like a lifeline, feeling like an imposter in a sea of tuxedos and gowns that cost more than my annual rent. The room was a vortex of performative charity and aggressive networking, the air thick with the scent of expensive lilies and desperation. Then the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a gravitational pull. The crowd near the entrance parted, not out of politeness, but instinct. Vivian. I had never seen her out of a suit. I expected her to look softer, perhaps. I was wrong. She looked like a weapon, sheathed in midnight blue silk. The dress was severe, high-necked in the front, but when she turned to hand her wrap to an attendant, the back plunged dangerously low, revealing the sharp architecture of her spine and the smooth, pale expanse of skin usually hidden. She didn't walk. She glided. The machine recalibrated for evening wear. She was terrifying. She was magnificent. I tried to find an exit, but I was intercepted. You're the new eyes on the Kensington deal. The voice was oily and too close. I turned to find Julian Thorne, a partner at a rival firm, looming over me. He smelled of scotch and entitlement. I'm part of the team, I said, stepping back. I heard Vivian has you chained to the desk. She's a grinder. Doesn't know how to turn it off. He stepped into my personal space, his eyes dropping to my neckline. My firm believes in work-life balance. We should grab a drink, discuss your trajectory. I started to reply, but a shadow fell over us. Julian. Vivian's voice was like ice cracking. I wasn't aware you were soliciting my staff. Is your talent pool that shallow? Julian flinched. He turned, his smile faltering as he met Vivian's gaze. She stood close to me, closer than professional norms dictated. Vivian, just making conversation, he stammered. You were fishing, she corrected. And you're terrible at it. The bar is that way. Go find it before I mention your sloppy due diligence on the Miller file to your managing partner. Julian fled. Thank you, I breathed. Vivian finally looked at me. Her gaze swept from my heels to my hair, lingering on the pulse fluttering in my throat. It was an appraisal, slow and deliberate. He's a shark, she said, her voice dropping low. But you look like you were bleeding in the water. I was handling it. You were retreating. She stepped closer, closing the gap Julian had vacated. Her scent, amber and ozone, wrapped around me. She reached out, taking the champagne flute from my hand. She took a sip from the exact spot my lips had touched, her eyes never leaving mine. Cheap, she pronounced, handing it back. You have terrible taste in distractions. It was free. Nothing is free. You pay with your time. She leaned in, her lips inches from my ear. Don't let men like that think you're available. You belong to the deal. Which means, for now, you belong to me. The possessiveness hit me hard. It wasn't professional. It was territorial. Walk with me, she ordered. She didn't wait. She moved to guide me through the crowd. Her hand came up and settled on the small of my back. It wasn't a polite steering gesture. Her palm was flat, firm, pressing against the thin fabric of my dress. Her fingers splayed slightly, claiming the curve of my spine. The heat of her skin seared through the silk, branding me. I could feel the strength in her hand, the control she exerted with just a touch. We moved through the ballroom as a single unit. People got out of our way. They saw Vivian Sterling, the CEO, cutting a path. But I felt the woman who was burning a handprint into my lower back. Outside, the valet had the car waiting. Vivian guided me in, her hand sliding away only at the last second, leaving a phantom warmth. The interior was silent, insulated from the city. We sat in the dark leather seats, the streetlights flashing across our faces. She didn't speak. She just stared out the window, her profile sharp against the blurring city. But the air between us was heavy with the things she hadn't said, and the realization that I didn't want her to stop. The summons to London wasn't a request. It was a tactical deployment. Wheels up at 8 a.m., don't check a bag. The email had landed in my inbox with the dawn, stripping away any illusion that I had control over my own schedule. By the time I arrived at the private terminal in Teterboro, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with impending rain. The Gulf Stream was a hermetically sealed capsule of beige leather and hush money. Once the door sealed shut, the world outside ceased to exist. There were no flight attendants hovering, no drink carts, just the two of us and the pilot behind a reinforced door. It was an intimacy that felt enforced by altitude. Vivian sat across from me, her laptop already open. But as we climbed through the cloud layer, something shifted. She closed the laptop and rubbed her temple, the first unnecessary movement I'd seen her make in weeks. "You can relax," she said, not looking at me. "We're in a pressurized tube at 40,000 feet. The merger can wait for the ground." I watched her. Without the armor of the blazer and the height of the heels, she looked smaller, human. The lines of exhaustion around her eyes were visible in the harsh sunlight streaming through the oval windows. "I've never seen you relax," I admitted, taking a sip of sparkling water. "I don't relax. I conserve energy." She turned to look out the window. There's a difference. The turbulence hit without warning. It wasn't a rattle. It was a drop. The plane fell out of the sky like a stone dropped down a well. My stomach slammed into my throat. The champagne flute on the table rattled violently, and the cabin groaned under the stress. I gripped the armrest, my knuckles turning white, my breath catching in a sharp, humiliating gasp. I expected her to ignore it. Instead, a hand covered mine. It was firm, warm, and absolute. She didn't squeeze, she anchored. Her palm pressed flat against the back of my hand, her fingers curling around the edge of my grip, locking me down. I looked up. Vivian wasn't looking at the window anymore. She was looking at me, her expression unflinching. "It's just air," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the panic. "Turbulence is just the atmosphere disagreeing with our trajectory. We'll win." The plane bucked again, harder this time, but her hand didn't move. Her grip was the only steady thing in the world. "Do you ever get scared?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could filter them. "Of flying? No. You can't negotiate with gravity." She paused, her thumb brushing the tendon of my hand, a rhythmic, soothing motion she didn't seem aware she was making. "I fear things I can control but fail to. I fear imprecision. I fear the silence of an empty house after a victory." It was a crack in the facade, a glimpse of the loneliness that sat at the top of the tower. "That sounds heavy," I whispered. "It is." She looked at our hands, stacked together on the leather armrest. "That text you sent, about my hands." My heart did a different kind of lurch. "Vivian, Why hands?" she interrupted, her eyes lifting to mine, dark and searching. "Most people comment on the eyes, or the suit, or the reputation. Why hands?" The turbulence had stopped, but she didn't let go. We were floating in smooth air now, suspended in the silence. "Because hands tell the truth," I said, my voice low. "Eyes can lie. Suits are armor. But hands? I watched you sign the contract for the Miller deal. You didn't hesitate. I watched you fix the projector when IT failed. Capable. Strong. I wanted to know what they felt like." I stopped, terrified I'd gone too far. Vivian didn't pull away. She looked at me with a terrifying intensity, her pupils blown wide. "And?" she asked softly. "Now you know. They feel grounding." "Good." She finally withdrew her hand, the absence of it leaving my skin cold. She picked up her glasses, the mask sliding back into place as the pilot announced our descent. "Hold on to that thought. London is going to be a war zone." We landed on a wet tarmac, the gray English sky weeping against the windows. But as we transferred to the waiting car, the silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with the knowledge that the turbulence hadn't just been in the air. The hotel suite was obscene. It was the kind of luxury that made you feel guilty just by walking on the carpet. A sprawling expanse of cream velvet and gold fixtures overlooking the rain-streaked darkness of Regent Street. But the most significant feature wasn't the marble bath or the complimentary champagne. It was the heavy, white door in the center of the living area wall. "My room is through there," Vivian said, dropping her keycard on the console table. "Yours is here. The door connects them." She walked over to it, her movements efficient, and turned the lock. The click echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. She didn't open it. She just unlocked it, leaving the barrier in place but removing the security. It was a statement. I am accessible, if you dare. "We have 3 hours until the strategy dinner," she said, turning back to me. "Unpack, shower, be ready to destroy them." The next 12 hours were a blur of violence disguised as corporate governance. I watched the machine operate in her natural habitat, and it was terrifyingly beautiful. We sat in a boardroom that smelled of old money and furniture polish, facing off against 6 men who thought they could bully her because she was a woman in a skirt. They were wrong. I watched her dismantle their CEO, a man named Nigel, who liked the sound of his own voice, with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a single sheet of paper. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. She simply waited for him to finish his blustering, then slid a document across the mahogany table that outlined his company's hidden pension liabilities. "I suggest you reconsider the valuation," she said, her voice soft, "before I make this public, and your shareholders decide to reconsider your tenure." The room went dead silent. Nigel deflated. I sat to her right, taking notes, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was a visceral, physical reaction to her competence. Watching her wield power with such surgical precision was an aphrodisiac I hadn't anticipated. By the time we got back to the hotel, the adrenaline was beginning to curdle into exhaustion. We ordered room service, club sandwiches and a bottle of Sancerre that cost more than my first car, and ate in the suite's living area. The professional armor began to strip away. Vivian had discarded her jacket. I had kicked off my heels. The rain lashed against the windows, sealing us in a private world of gray light and warm lamps. She poured a second glass of wine, the liquid pale gold in the low light. "You were good today," she said. "You anticipated the data request on the pension funds. That saved us 10 minutes of arguing." "I just read the footnotes," I said, swirling my glass. "Most people don't." She took a sip, her eyes tracking the movement of the wine in my glass. Then, without shifting her posture, the air in the room changed. The temperature seemed to drop, the atmosphere thickening with sudden intent. "The text," she said. I froze. "Vivian, No," she held up a hand. "I want to know. You said you were thinking about my hands all day. That implies a specific thought process, a narrative." She set her glass down with a deliberate clink. "Tell me, what exactly were you thinking?" It was a trap. It was an invitation. "I was thinking about the way you hold a pen," I whispered, the truth bubbling up before I could stop it. "How you grip it so hard your knuckles turn white, but you never snap it. I was thinking about the control that requires." Vivian didn't move. She sat perfectly still, like a statue carved from ice and desire. "Go on." "I was thinking about how cool your skin always looks," I continued, my voice trembling. "And I was wondering if your hands were cold, or if that was just part of the act. I was wondering what it would feel like if you lost that control, if you stopped holding the pen and held something else." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with enough static to power the city. Vivian stood up slowly. She walked to the window, her reflection ghosting against the dark glass, watching me. "Dangerous thoughts," she murmured, not turning around. For a subordinate. The final negotiation meeting was a bloodbath disguised as a brunch. We were in a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Nigel realized his leverage was evaporating, decided to scorch the earth. At 2 p.m., he pulled a document from his briefcase, a hidden intellectual property dispute that hadn't been in the data room. It was a poison pill, designed to kill the deal or force a massive price reduction. Vivian froze. For the first time in 2 years, I saw the machine stall. Her eyes narrowed, her mind racing to calculate the damage. But the silence stretched a second too long. I didn't think. I reacted. I remembered a footnote from a subsidiary audit I'd read at 3 a.m. 3 weeks ago. I pulled the file from my stack, circled the paragraph in red ink, and slid it across the mahogany table to her. It was an indemnity clause from the original patent filing. It rendered Nigel's threat irrelevant. Vivian looked at the paper. Then she looked at me. The corner of her mouth lifted in a smile that was terrifyingly sharp. She turned back to Nigel and destroyed him. The deal closed 20 minutes later. The victory high was potent, dangerous stuff. We rode it all the way back to the hotel in silence, the air in the car thick with adrenaline. When we got to the suite, the professional veneer didn't just crack, it shattered. Vivian didn't go to her room. She paced the living area, stripping off her blazer and tossing it onto the sofa, a careless gesture that was completely out of character. She went to the minibar and poured 2 whiskeys, neat, her hands moving with a frantic energy I'd never seen before. "You took a risk," she said, turning to face me. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. "That clause. If you had been wrong, we would have looked incompetent." "I wasn't wrong," I said, standing my ground near the door. "I did the work. I knew the data. You undercut the flow of the negotiation." "I saved the negotiation," I shot back. The adrenaline was making me reckless. "You hesitated, Vivian. He had you. I stepped in." She stopped pacing. The silence that slammed into the room was sudden and absolute. She stared at me, her eyes dark, her expression unreadable. "I hesitated," she repeated softly. She took a step toward me. "Do you know why?" "Because he blindsided us." "No." She took another step. "Because I was distracted. Because for the last 48 hours, I haven't been thinking about the merger. I haven't been thinking about the share price. I've been thinking about what you said in the car, about my hands." My breath hitched. She was close now, invading my personal space, the scent of her perfume overwhelming my senses. "I kept you close," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Not just because you're good at your job. You are. But because that text, it didn't offend me. It woke me up. I've been sleepwalking for 10 years, being the machine, being perfect, being cold. Then you sent that message, and suddenly I was angry. I was alive." "Vivian, I wanted to fire you," she confessed, her eyes searching my face. "I wanted to fire you so I could stop thinking about it. But I couldn't. Because the truth is, I wanted to know if you were brave enough to do something about it. I wanted to see if you could handle the heat you invited." "I can handle it," I whispered. "Prove it." The challenge hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then the distance vanished. I didn't know who moved first. It was a collision, inevitable and violent. Her hands, those hands I had fantasized about, tangled into my hair, gripping tight, pulling me down. My hands found her waist, the silk of her blouse slippery and warm under my fingers. The kiss wasn't tentative. It wasn't a question. It was a reclamation. It tasted of whiskey and suppressed desire and months of silence finally breaking. Vivian kissed like she led, with absolute control and devastating intensity. She backed me up against the wall, her body pressing into mine, hard and unyielding. The machine was gone. There was only this: the heat of her skin, the desperate sound she made in her throat, and the terrifying realization that we had just crossed a line we could never uncross. The professional boundary was obliterated, burned to ash by the fire we had both been stoking since the moment I hit send. London dawn arrived not with sunlight, but with a gradual lightening of the grayscale outside the heavy velvet curtains. I woke up disoriented, the high thread count sheets tangling around my legs, the air in the room cool and still smelling faintly of the rain from the night before. For a moment, I lay still, cataloging the sensory details that didn't fit my life. The silence of a luxury hotel, the ache in my muscles, and the rhythmic, steady breathing of the woman beside me. I turned my head. Vivian Sterling was asleep. It felt like a violation to witness it. Her dark hair was spilled across the white pillowcase, messy and unstyled. Her face, usually a fortress of sharp angles, was soft, almost unguarded. One hand rested near my shoulder, the fingers curled loosely, stripped of the tension that usually defined them. It was terrifying. It was the most intimate thing I had ever seen, eclipsing even the act itself. Then, reality intruded. It started with a vibration on the nightstand, her phone. Then mine, buzzing on the floor where I'd dropped it. The world had started turning again. The merger was closed. The bubble was popping. Vivian stirred. Her eyes opened, and for a split second, there was a haze of confusion. Then, the download completed. The softness vanished, replaced instantly by the familiar, terrifying clarity. She sat up, pulling the sheet with her, and reached for her phone. "Legal has the final signatures," she said. Her voice was rough with sleep, a sound that did dangerous things to my pulse. But the words were pure business. "We need to be wheels up in 90 minutes. The transition from lovers to colleagues was abrupt and brutal. We moved around the suite in a synchronized dance of retrieval, finding stray clothing, repacking the armor of our profession. The shower was quick and efficient. By the time room service delivered a silver pot of coffee, Vivian was buttoning her blouse, transforming back into the CEO. She didn't put the blazer on yet. She sat on the edge of the unmade bed, holding the porcelain cup, staring into the black liquid like it held the stock market predictions. "We need to talk about the logistics," she said. She didn't look at me. I stood by the window, watching the Regent Street traffic. "I know. The deal is done. I go back to my desk, you go back to the 42nd floor. Technically," she took a sip. "But we both know that's impossible. I don't revert to previous versions, and I certainly don't intend to pretend last night was a glitch in the software." My heart hammered against my ribs. "So what are we? A liability?" "A complication," she corrected, finally looking up. Her eyes were clear, direct. "I won't hide this. I don't live in the shadows, and I don't make apologies for what I want. But I also won't let this destroy your trajectory. If we go public now, every success you've had on this deal becomes suspect. The narrative won't be about your competence. It will be about your proximity to me. I don't care about the narrative." "I do." She stood up, crossing the room to stand in front of me. She didn't touch me, but the heat radiating from her was palpable. "I care about your reputation too much to let it be collateral damage. We keep it quiet. 3 months. I will arrange a transfer to the strategy division. It's a promotion, it's distinct from my direct oversight, and it justifies the move based on your performance in London, not your performance in my suite." 3 months of secrecy, I said, testing the weight of the words. "Passing you in the hall and pretending I don't know you? It will be torture," she agreed, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. "But it will be safe. And then we discuss the future, properly." The flight back was a masterclass in repression. We sat across from each other in the leather seats, laptops open, reviewing press releases and integration timelines. The pilot announced our altitude. The world moved on. But every time she passed me a file, her fingers lingered for a fraction of a second too long. Every time our eyes met over the screens, the air in the cabin thickened. The machine was back online, running at full efficiency, but now I knew where the off switch was. I knew the softness she hid behind the amber and ozone. As the New York skyline appeared, a glittering grid of ambition, the dread of returning to the office vanished. I felt the thrill of a secret that was just beginning to burn. Returning to the 42nd floor felt like stepping back into a cage. But this time, I carried the key. The secrecy didn't weigh me down. It buoyed me. The dynamic of the text messages inverted completely. My phone became a lifeline I guarded with my life. Vivian sending dry, demanding messages from across the boardroom table that carried a hidden frequency only I could hear. "Your slide on Q3 projections is conservative. Also, you looked bored. Fix your face." Or, late at night, "The empty side of the bed is too cold. Fix that." 3 months bled away in a blur of stolen glances. Then, the email arrived. "Transfer approved. Strategic Planning Division." It was the exit strategy. The promise kept. At 6 p.m. on my last day, I took the box of my personal effects to the elevator. The doors slid open, and she was there. Alone. It was a statistical improbability. Or perhaps another example of her terrifying precision. She didn't look surprised. She stood in the center of the car, eyes forward, profile sharp. The doors slid shut, sealing us in the vertical steel box. The camera in the corner blinked its red eye, watching, but for the 10 seconds between floors, the world belonged to us. She didn't speak. She just reached out, her hand finding mine in the space between us. Her grip was firm, her thumb brushing my knuckles, the same grounding touch from the turbulence. The elevator descended toward a reality where we didn't have to hide. The future she wanted to discuss wasn't about the company anymore. It was about us. If you want to hear how we navigate the secrecy of the next few months, subscribe and let me know in the comments.